At 11:43 at night, a text message lit up her phone. Just married your business partner. You are pathetic, by the way. Most women would have shattered. Most women would have screamed. Scarlett Ross took a sip of cold coffee, looked at the photograph, and typed back one single word. Beautiful. Because what her husband and her most trusted partner did not know, what they could never have imagined, was that she had been quietly building something for 7 months. Not tears, not grief, a dossier. A file so precise, so complete, it tracked their every move down to the exact second. They thought they were sending a grenade. They had actually handed her the detonator. The real lesson here is simple and devastating. The most dangerous person in the room is never the loudest one. It is the one who stays completely still, says nothing, and has already prepared everything. If this story made your pulse rise in the first 10 seconds, you already know you need to stay until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you thought of Scarlett's response, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you stories with genuine meaning and lasting lessons.
At 11:43 p.m., my husband sent a text from Maui. Married your partner. You're pathetic, BTW. I studied the image, lace, champagne, smug faces, and typed a single word, beautiful. Then I opened my laptop and for the past 7 months initiated a sequence of commands they never dreamed I possessed. They thought I was the woman left behind. They had no idea they'd just put the final timestamp on a comprehensive fraud dossier. I am Scarlett Ross. I am 41, and I rebuild what others have obliterated. That isn't a metaphor. I founded and command Palisade Renewal Group, a disaster recovery coordination firm headquartered in Atlanta. When a Category 4 storm shears the roof from a high school, a flash flood eviscerates a hospital system, or an electrical fire reduces a courthouse to a toxic husk, I get the summons. We don't just sweep up, we deploy the specialized crews. We secure impossible materials amid regional scarcity. We navigate the brutal warfare of commercial insurance negotiations, and we erase the ash, the silt, and the wreckage. This was not an inheritance, nor was it launched with an Ivy League MBA. I forged Palisade with nothing but a beat-up Ford pickup and a will of pure, unyielding granite. At first, it was just a handful of small city contracts. I weathered my first hurricane season in a vinyl office chair, fueled by cold canned soup and an absolute refusal to accept no from any vendor. My own blood and sweat are ground into the concrete foundations of half the public structures on the Gulf Coast. I am an expert in structural integrity, in buildings and in people. Nolan Weller, the man currently enjoying my money in Hawaii, is my husband. He is devastatingly handsome, with that golden retriever charisma that disarms everyone instantly. He used to create short, sentimental films for niche ad agencies. As Palisade grew, I hired him to shape our public narrative. It felt like a perfect fusion. I was the grit. He was the gloss. He softened my public image, framing our work as heroic and cinematic. He made me feel less like a machine designed for logistics and more like a woman who could still be reached. Then there is Delaney Cross, my partner, the woman I personally promoted to that rank. She is a mathematical savant, ruthless and as sharp as a shard of glass. I recruited her 3 years ago for her precise mind to manage our expansion and the Byzantine hell of government contracts. Delaney is fluent in the cold syntax of profit margins and legal exposure, languages I never had the patience for. My trust in her was absolute. She was my designated successor, my strategic right hand. Now, she and Nolan are one. That text wasn't a drunken slip or a guilty confession. It was a calculated act of war. The insult was juvenile, but the attached photo was the intended kill shot. In it, they stand on a polished stone terrace overlooking the Pacific at night. They both wear floral leis. Nolan toasts the camera with a flute of champagne, looking relaxed and victorious. Delaney, nestled against his chest, gives a smug, satisfied smile. They look like a couple who believe they've just won, cleanly and beautifully. They cast themselves as the romantic leads, having definitively vanquished the villain. They needed me to feel the humiliation of the discarded wife, the work-obsessed fool finally broken and replaced by a sleeker model. I did not weep. I did not throw my phone. I didn't collapse onto the floor in a heap of broken dignity. I remained perfectly still in my quiet office, lifted my mug, and took a slow sip of cool coffee. I examined the photograph again, not with a shattered heart, but with the cool detachment of a damage assessor. I noted the lighting, the luxury resort details, the sheer arrogance in their posture. Then, with clinical precision, I captured a screenshot. I put the phone down. I opened a secure drive on my laptop, moved through encrypted folders, and dropped the image into its designated file. This folder was not new, not created in a burst of rage tonight. It has been there for months. The file's title is North Exit. An observer would find my calm unnerving, even monstrous. A woman whose husband and top executive have just eloped should be shattering glass. But my capacity for those tears was exhausted long before this photo arrived. The truth is, the affair was old news. The physical betrayal, the hushed conversations that ceased when I entered a room, the site visits that were stolen afternoons. I had processed that agony in silence months ago. I had already grieved the loss of my marriage and my friendship. No, what seized my undivided attention was the timestamp, 11:43 p.m. Eastern Time. I did the math instantly. That would be 5:43 p.m. in Maui, a very specific, deliberate moment to declare war. They were not merely high on champagne and victory. I know Delaney Cross. She does nothing without a strategic purpose. Emotion is a tool for her, used to achieve a calculated end. Sending this ultimate provocation, late at night, was not just for the thrill of breaking my heart. It was a tactical maneuver. They were trying to induce an emotional cataclysm. They needed me unhinged. They needed me lost in a fog of personal grief because they were preparing their next, far more dangerous move. They were banking on my being too blinded by tears to see it. They believed this text was the story's end, the final crushing blow. They failed to understand that for me, that image and that timestamp were merely the starting gun. They thought they had achieved a clean escape, not realizing they had just perfectly authenticated a fraud dossier, right down to the second. Atlanta is forged from relentless ambition and oppressive humidity. 13 years ago, Palisade was just a hot rented warehouse off I-285. I was a young woman with a clipboard and steel-toed boots, trying to impose order on pure chaos with 3 dispatchers. We spent our time yelling over idling engines, connecting flatbeds of supplies and contractors with panicked county officials. I quickly learned that in disaster recovery, empathy is a liability. Ruthless effectiveness is what restores infrastructure. Over 13 years, Palisade became the benchmark. When a hospital in South Carolina was swamped by a storm surge or an insurance syndicate required an instant damage assessment, they did not call a corporate hotline. They dialed my cell. I provided aggressive timelines, immaculate ledgers, and above all, I absorbed their institutional terror and projected absolute command. But becoming the ultimate crisis manager came at a price. By the time we hit 8-figure revenues, my own soul had become a titanium vault. I ran on black coffee, adrenaline, and 4 hours of sleep. My life was my work, my emotional capacity, non-existent. That was the fortress Nolan Weller found. At 33, I was untouchable and achingly lonely, though I would have died before admitting it. We met at a tedious Atlanta charity event I was only at to pressure a zoning director. Nolan was filming for the organizers. His easy charm was a direct counterpoint to my own guarded rigidity. He was indifferent to my profit margins. He spotted me in a severe suit and made a terrible joke about the catering. It broke through. My laugh felt foreign and rusted. Nolan bypassed all my defenses, injecting color into my grayscale existence, introducing me to jazz vinyl and quiet Sunday mornings. He made me feel less like a disaster processing machine and more like a woman who could be loved. He smoothed my roughest edges. Then, 3 years ago, Palisade scaled up. The state-level contracts nearly buried me in red tape. That is when Delaney Cross appeared. In her final interview, she took one look at my chaotic whiteboard and in 20 minutes rebuilt my entire operational flow. She was sharp, resourceful, and brutally efficient. She spoke the sterile language of risk mitigation that investors craved. I was buckling under the weight of the enterprise. Delaney offered to share the load, and I gratefully accepted. I made her my chief operating officer, my sister-in-arms, the only other woman who understood the gravity of our work. In the cold light of this moment, I see my need for relief paved the way for this. My gratitude for Nolan's warmth and Delaney's brilliance made me tear down my own walls. I felt compelled to reward them for saving me. I let Nolan become the charismatic public face for our top-tier clients, whining and dining officials on the company's dime. To Delaney, I gave unrestricted access to Palisade's most sensitive operational secrets. I gave her signature authority over vendor payments and autonomy over our entire supply chain. I told myself I needed to focus on the 10-year strategy, so I let my husband and my COO run the day-to-day, giving them countless unsupervised hours together. I built the garden for them, locked the gate, and handed them the key. The warnings were not a sudden storm. They were a slow, toxic bloom. The clues were buried in the painful mediocrity of everyday life. Nolan's phone, once left face up on the counter, was now permanently screened down. He changed his passcode from our anniversary, blaming a new security protocol. Delaney started booking extended site visits with him. A simple walkthrough of a damaged school would inexplicably require 3 days of their focused, overnight attention. When I questioned the logistics, their response was a synchronized dance. A quick glance, then Delaney's smooth assurance they were handling things for me. Then came the executive meetings from which I was quietly excluded. I'd enter the conference room and the conversation would die, shifting to something bland. When I asked about a vendor email thread, Delaney would touch my arm. She would look me straight in the eyes, claiming I was too vital to our Carolina expansion to be distracted. That is what burns me now. It was not just the affair. It was the psychological warfare, the way they made me doubt my own mind. My gut would twist with that primal intuitive warning. A quiet voice insisted they stood too close, that their shared laughter excluded me. But instead of listening, I would tell myself I was being paranoid and unreasonable. I blamed my exhaustion, the stress of a 300-person payroll. I recited the lie that powerful women aren't jealous. I reasoned my own intuition into silence because losing them felt like an impossible price to pay. My anxiety, I concluded, was a symptom of overwork, not a blaring siren warning of betrayal. I sit now in the dark, my face lit by a monitor, tracing the architecture of my own destruction. I gave them every tool they needed. To Nolan, I gave the unguarded parts of my soul. To Delaney, I gave the keys to my kingdom. I committed the cardinal sin of the self-made. In the sacred vow of marriage and the brutal theater of business, I made the same fatal error. I was a fool to believe that opportunity, respect, and gratitude would somehow manufacture loyalty. The first thread of this unraveling was not perfume on a collar or a hushed phone call. It was a line item in a quarterly ledger. I was running a routine audit on vendor payments on a Tuesday night when one entry stopped me cold. It was an anomaly. A consulting fee, filed under public relations, paid to an entity called Pacific Ridge Advisory. I know every vendor who cashes a check from my company. I had never heard of them. A search of our vendor directory returned nothing. I had never signed an onboarding form for them. No budget for this existed. I pulled the invoice and the internal authorization email. The chain of approval was technically complete, but aggressively rushed and unorthodox. The first signature was my husband's. He had justified it as brand integration, but he lacked the authority to approve a payment of this size. His budget had hard limits, and any overage needed my personal authorization. The second approval, the one that triggered the wire transfer, was from my chief operating officer. Her email demanded expedited payment before quarter end. It was a perfect bureaucratic bypass. He invented the need. She used her executive power. They moved the money right past my desk, counting on the sheer transaction volume to hide their tracks. I said nothing. I did not rage. I did not demand an explanation. I mentally tagged the transaction, copied the files to a secure drive, and I waited. 4 days later, the final piece arrived, delivered by mundane domestic technology. I was in our living room, using our old family tablet. The device was tethered to a family cloud account, an old digital ghost Nolan assumed I never visited. A calendar notification materialized on the screen, a sync artifact from his primary phone. It confirmed a reservation for an exclusive villa in Maui, explicitly for 2 adults. I navigated the details, my pulse a slow, heavy engine. The booking was 4 months old. The dates were a perfect overlay of a regional conference in Nevada that Delaney, my partner, had vehemently argued I should skip, insisting she would handle it. A different woman would have detonated, demanding a screaming confession across the dining room table. I, however, closed the application, cleared the cache, and meticulously wiped my fingerprints from the glass, placing the tablet back in its precise original position. The next morning, I drove past my own headquarters and into the downtown offices of Mara Duval. Mara isn't a family law attorney. She is a corporate litigator, a specialist in hostile takeovers. She is a wartime counselor. Across her mahogany desk, I slid the Pacific Ridge Ledger. I needed a discreet, off-the-books forensic financial expert. By midday, Mara had established a secure channel to Elias Trent, an auditor who could trace a single cent through a maze of shell corporations. For the subsequent 7 months, I inhabited a brutal dual reality. By day, I was the visionary CEO, praising my husband's work in meetings and endorsing my partner's operational strategies. I shared coffee and discussed revenue projections with them. At night, behind my home office firewall, I became a ghost in my own machine. I had Elias quietly extract the deep back-end logs from our enterprise software, examining not just the files, but the invisible digital footprints left by their users. I initiated a silent, comprehensive audit of every municipal bid my chief operating officer had managed that year. The pattern Elias and I uncovered was methodical and chilling. She was systematically building the legal framework to expand her unilateral signing authority. She was embedding subtle technical clauses into routine operating agreement updates, designed to neutralize my absolute veto power over major financial decisions. She was positioning herself to leverage company assets without my consent. Elias also found Nolan's digital signature all over our secure bidding servers. His media role required no access to our proprietary pricing models, yet his account was a silent observer on dozens of classified email threads concerning our most profitable upcoming public sector contracts, mapping our strategic weak points. This was the genesis of North Exit, a secure directory I created. It was not a repository for grief, but a sterile, organized digital vault. Every suspicious invoice and altered document was cataloged, time-stamped, and archived with surgical precision. I correlated the dates of their clandestine meetings with corresponding spikes in unauthorized server access. I was not assembling a case for divorce court. I was building an indictment for corporate sabotage and federal fraud. I filed away their betrayals with the detachment of a trauma surgeon arranging her tools before a long and bloody procedure. This was no longer about a failed marriage. This was preparation for the precise moment I would excise the cancer from my life's work. The hushed conversations and stolen looks were merely superficial signs of a much deeper pathology. The Hawaiian villa was not a romantic escape funded by a cheating husband. It was a strategic celebration financed entirely through corporate espionage. I understood then, alone in the blue glow of my monitors, that the true betrayal was unfolding not in a hotel room, but in my company ledgers. They weren't tragic lovers. They were domestic terrorists, and their affair was simply camouflage for a calculated corporate heist. They were attempting to steal my life's work, using my trust as the key to pick the locks. The digital clock on my monitor flipped to 11:44 at night. Exactly 60 seconds had passed since the picture of their smug smiles had illuminated my phone. I had allocated my marriage 60 seconds to die. The period of mourning was concluded. Now the surgery would commence. My fingers descended upon the keyboard with the brutal speed of a technician who knows exactly which wire detonates the charge. I did not draft an emotional email or reach for my phone to scream. I opened the master administrative terminal for Palisade Renewal Group, bypassing the user interface and diving directly into the foundational security architecture of the network. With 3 rapid keystrokes, I located the active profile of my chief operating officer. I severed her connection to the central bidding vault and the master contract repository. I hit the enter key so hard the plastic cracked against the backplate. Her permissions evaporated instantly. Any attempt to access a spreadsheet or vendor agreement would now greet her with a fatal server error. But data was only one half of the equation. In this war, blood flow is measured in capital. I pivoted to our commercial bank's encrypted portal, bypassing 2-factor authentication with a physical security token. I navigated to the master treasury controls and drafted an irrevocable emergency administrative order. Effective immediately, any outbound transaction exceeding $25,000 required my non-delegable biometric approval, plus secondary legal verification from Mara Duval. In less than 4 seconds, the financial arteries of Palisade were clamped shut. My partner could no longer authorize the purchase of a mid-sized sedan, much less fund her silent coup. Her executive signature was now worthless ink. Then I aimed the weaponized precision of my administrative rights at my husband. I systematically obliterated his access to the entire digital brand library, the company cloud, and all video storage servers. He was locked out of his professional life, but that was not enough. I had to cauterize the personal vulnerabilities. I opened the smart home console on my private network. This house was shielded by an ironclad prenuptial trust. In the residential security matrix, I located his user profile and purged his biometric data from the front door scanners. I erased his digital key. Then I reset the garage keypad to a new 12-digit sequence. He would return to a locked fortress. The perimeter was now secure. Time to set the digital foundation. I deployed the most aggressive breach protocol we had. An enterprise-wide legal hold was initiated. This was a system-level lockdown. The servers instantly froze our entire architecture. Every email, message, and draft was mirrored and encrypted. All data became an untouchable vault. Nothing could now be altered or deleted. The battlefield was preserved. I moved from defense to offense. I opened my encrypted mail and attached the dossier. The recipient was Mara Duval. The subject line was empty. The message was 2 sentences. They moved. We answer at dawn. I hit send, transmitting gigabytes of ruin. I then sent a sanitized email to our board chairman. The tone was sterile and professional. No mention of villas, vows, or my personal life. It was pure risk management. I informed him of a severe conflict of interest. It posed an immediate threat to governance. I requested the board be on emergency standby. The notification was sent. A harsh buzz shattered the silence. My phone lit up. It was him. Texts flooded in, mocking me. He asked if I was crying. His insults were bait, seeking my rage. I watched his pathetic digital tantrum. I felt nothing but a chilling clarity. I did not reply. I would never speak to them in my own voice again. The conversation was over. From now on, my voice would be forensic ledgers and legal injunctions. I pushed my chair back from the desk. I rose and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, Atlanta's electric grid pulsed with energy. Millions of lights defied the dark. I pressed my palm against the cool glass. Thousands of miles away, they celebrated. They thought they had thrown me from a cliff. They didn't know I had just severed their oxygen lines. They believed they owned the story. They were already dead. At 8 a.m., a calendar chime sounded. It was a summons for an emergency board meeting. My COO had initiated it just 10 minutes ago. The invite included a draft resolution. The motion was to make me an honorary founder. It was corporate language for stripping my power while a scandal raged. Their move was cruel but strategically sound. My phone began flagging social media alerts. The wedding photos from Hawaii were being posted everywhere. They were controlling the narrative. They wanted the board to see a devastated woman. They were manufacturing a crisis of confidence, painting me as unstable. While Delaney launched her coup, my husband targeted my clients. My surveillance protocols were active. I could see his outgoing calls from his company phone. He was dialing our oldest municipal accounts. I listened to a voicemail he left. His voice was full of rehearsed empathy. He spoke of a leadership transition. He spoke of me in the past tense, as if I were already gone. They were moving fast to create a new reality. At 8:30 a.m., I joined the video conference. The 5 board members looked grim. Then Delaney's camera activated. She sat in a resort business center, projecting reluctant responsibility. My camera went live. Silence. I did not look like I had spent the night weeping. I wore a charcoal blazer, my hair in a severe knot. My expression was stone. I stared into the camera lens. Delaney cleared her throat, unsettled, but began her script. "Thank you for joining so quickly," she said, her tone dripping false sympathy. "Scarlett's had a personal disruption. I am concerned about her capacity to lead," she continued. "To protect our bids and to protect Scarlett from this pressure, I propose a temporary restructure. The company needs shelter from an emotional executive. I am ready to step in as acting CEO." She finished, awaiting agreement. "Are you finished, Delaney?" I asked, my voice flat. Before she could reply, a new face appeared. It was Mara Duval at her desk, flanked by legal files. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice a razor. "I am personal counsel for the founder. Before anyone could vote to detonate my life's work, I gave Mara the signal. Before you entertain a motion that will trigger a tidal wave of shareholder litigation," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I suggest you look at the screen." An image of our foundational operating agreement appeared. Article 4, Section 7. Mara enunciated every syllable. Any forced alteration of the chief executive officer's title requires the explicit written founder consent of Scarlett Ross. A board supermajority could not touch it without triggering the automatic liquidation of their own unvested shares. "In short, Delaney," Mara concluded, "you lack the authority to call this vote." I watched the blood drain from Delaney's face. The confident usurper vanished, replaced by a woman staring down the barrel of her own execution. "It's an emergency provision," Delaney stammered, her voice thin and tight. "The board must act if the founder is compromised." A new voice cut in. "The only person compromised here is you." Elias Trent's camera went live. He didn't waste time on introductions. He filled the screen with a forensic accounting flowchart so dense it was a work of art. "My name is Elias Trent," he stated, his voice a flat, cold instrument. "I'm an independent auditor retained by the founder. For several hours, we've been uncovering severe financial irregularities tied directly to the chief operating officer." Elias moved without drama, a surgeon identifying a cancer. He highlighted the consulting fees I'd been tracking for months. "We've documented unauthorized capital outlays to a shadow entity, Pacific Ridge Advisory. We have metadata proving the COO accelerated these payments, bypassing all compliance. Furthermore," he continued, "we have verified an egregious, undisclosed conflict of interest that fundamentally breaches the Executive Code of Conduct." The silence in the virtual room was no longer just tense. It was lethal. The chairman, a bastion of old-world banking, leaned into his camera. "Miss Cross," the chairman's voice dropped, becoming gravelly, "are you managing unauthorized corporate funds through a third-party firm?" "This is a witch hunt." Delaney's composure finally shattered. "She's angry about her husband, so she's inventing a scandal to ruin me." I leaned into my camera, letting her see the frozen calm in my eyes. "I don't invent things, Delaney. I just read the ledgers. You assumed I was too shattered to check." The chairman didn't blink. He was a survivor. He immediately bulldozed the agenda. "The motion to restructure the CEO role is dismissed," he announced. "Instead, the board issues an immediate freeze on all authority, signatory rights, and data access for the chief operating officer. Delaney, you are suspended pending a full forensic investigation to be completed within 72 hours. You will not contact vendors. You will not speak for this firm. The meeting ended. I leaned back as morning sunlight cut through my office window. The adrenaline receded, leaving a cold, hard clarity. The sheer, terrifying architecture of their betrayal finally snapped into focus. They didn't just run to Hawaii to escape a marriage or flaunt an affair. The text, the photo, the timing, it was a psychological smokescreen. They had weaponized my own heartbreak against me. They needed me broken, blinded by grief, just long enough to quietly assassinate my career and hijack the empire I built with my bare hands. They expected a victim. They found a fortress. At precisely 3 p.m, the silence of my home was broken by a vibration from my private phone. I expected a frantic investor or a follow-up from the board. Instead, it was an unrecognized number. The message was jagged, desperate. She needed to speak with me. She was terrified. She was in a parking garage, ordered to destroy federal compliance records. The sender was Tessa Van. I stared at the name. In our world, Tessa Van was a ghost, the executive assistant to my COO. For 2 years, she was the invisible machinery in the background. She was the one who ordered lunches, managed itineraries, and fetched dry cleaning. To people like Delaney and Nolan, Tessa wasn't a person with a conscience. She was office furniture that occasionally produced a spreadsheet. They never imagined the furniture was listening. I didn't reply with warmth. In this kind of war, a defector is often a spy with a new blade. I texted her a single, non-negotiable directive. Drive to an address in the financial district, park underground, take the private elevator to the 42nd floor. It was the suite number for Mara Duval's law firm. If Tessa was carrying the truth, it would be born inside the fortress of attorney-client privilege. 45 minutes later, I sat at Mara's conference table. The door opened and Tessa entered, looking utterly shattered. She was a young woman in a simple gray cardigan, clutching a paper coffee cup like a lifeline. Her hands trembled. She avoided my eyes, her gaze fixed on the heavy legal books lining the walls. Mara sat at the head of the table, her face a neutral mask. I offered Tessa water and told her to breathe. She sat, unzipped a worn tote bag, and placed a small silver solid-state drive on the table. She said that after the meeting, Delaney had called her in a white-hot panic. The polished executive had ordered Tessa to log in and backdate ethics disclosure forms. More than that, Delaney had ordered her to access the backup servers and permanently purge all internal emails related to Pacific Ridge Advisory. She assumed Tessa was too meek, too dependent on her salary to ever refuse. But Tessa hadn't deleted the files. She had mirrored them onto the drive. Mara plugged it into a secure, isolated laptop. What appeared on the screen wasn't just evidence of a cover-up. It was the blueprint for a corporate slaughter. Tessa had brought us everything: chat logs, encrypted emails, and a 30-slide presentation created by Nolan and Delaney. Its title was an arrogant sneer, Phase Shift. As Mara clicked through, the breathtaking malice of their plan unfurled. The Hawaii trip was never a romance. It was an operational milestone. The presentation detailed how the wedding photo was a psychological weapon, timed to the hour, designed to paralyze my decision-making with emotional trauma. They needed me blinded by grief, absent while Delaney executed a boardroom coup. Then, the financial documents grew darker. We opened the purged ledgers. Pacific Ridge Advisory wasn't just a shell company for siphoning vacation money from my marketing budget. It was a meticulously designed kickback operation. Our 3 largest, most precarious vendors were funneling 6-figure payments to Pacific Ridge, masked as consulting fees. For this, Delaney was rigging our proprietary bidding system to guarantee those vendors won our most valuable public contracts. This was far beyond a messy corporate separation. It was a systemic bribery conspiracy using public infrastructure money. I was processing the fraud's terrifying scope with detached precision when Mara opened a stray audio file buried in a chat log between them. The file was a brief voice note Nolan sent Delaney late one night, probably from his car in our own garage. Mara pressed play. The conference room speakers projected my husband's voice with nauseating clarity. He was chuckling. The sound was casual, assured, and profoundly vicious. "Don't stress about the fallout," his recorded voice bounced off the paneled walls. "I know her playbook. When she gets that picture, she won't smash things or call her lawyers. She's too controlled. She'll shut down, she'll retreat. By the time she figures out how to retaliate, we'll already control the entire board." The recording stopped, leaving a dense, ringing quiet. Until that moment, I'd been running purely on logic, adrenaline, and a fierce drive to protect my company. I had sealed the person inside me within a titanium shell so the CEO could wage war. But that recording was a knife that found the gap in my armor. It wasn't the theft or even the affair that broke me. The deepest agony came from knowing he had studied my most private vulnerabilities for years. He had cataloged my stoicism, my dread of public failure, and my instinct to withdraw under fire, then weaponized those exact traits against me. He built his entire corporate sabotage strategy on my trauma responses. I felt a sudden glacial drop in my core. I shut my eyes for 3 counts, feeling the burn of a betrayal that went far beyond simple anger. I inhaled slowly, deliberately, forcing air into my lungs as I consciously bolted the vault door again. When I opened my eyes, I saw Tessa. She was crying, tears soaking the collar of her cardigan. The 2 people I had trusted most had analyzed me like a predator. Yet this quiet junior assistant, a woman who owed me nothing, had risked her entire career because she could not stand the sheer injustice of their cruelty. Mara pulled a thick stack of papers from a folder and slid it across the table. It was an ironclad whistleblower protection contract. "Sign this," Mara said quietly, setting a pen beside it. "The instant you do, you're covered by federal law and my firm's legal shield. They can't touch your job, your salary, or your good name." I leaned in, my arms on the cool tabletop, and met Tessa's gaze. The ice in my chest had been replaced by a quiet, intense solidarity. "You don't work for them now," I said, my voice unwavering. "You work for me, and no one who sides with me will ever be overlooked again." Tessa took the pen, her hand steady now. She signed with a firm, decisive motion. In that room, the company's most timid employee had just become the witness who would bring their whole world down. They started their counterattack in the court of public opinion, relying on the modern fixation with appearances and emotion. By Tuesday, Nolan's voice filled the airwaves of a popular lifestyle podcast. He sat somewhere in a Los Angeles studio, using the smooth baritone I once loved. He was now using it to methodically assassinate my character. He described me as a suffocating, domineering woman obsessed with power. He told the host I had erased all romance from our lives, reducing our marriage to little more than a business arrangement. He cast himself as a free spirit being crushed by a corporate tyrant. At the same time, a major regional business magazine published a glossy cover story focused entirely on Delaney. The article was a masterwork of narrative warfare. It ignored the corporate fraud and adultery, recasting her betrayal as a courageous feminist act. The story portrayed her as a brilliant executive who finally broke free from a toxic, emotionally barren workplace to find her own truth and happiness. They were rebranding a premeditated corporate takeover as a journey of self-discovery. They needed everyone, our clients, our investors, the public, to see them as the casualties of my alleged despotism. The internet erupted. My social media feeds exploded with notifications from strangers demanding a response. The conventional wisdom for a publicly shamed woman in my position demanded I engage them on their own terms. I was supposed to post a raw, tearful video. I was expected to leak ambiguous text messages to the press. I should have hired a crisis team to draft a statement on my resilience. I did none of it. I never logged on. I never spoke to a reporter. I never offered a single public tear for consumption. I stayed in my office, drank my coffee, and wrapped myself in a silence so profound it felt like a weapon. Let them have the microphones and the magazine spreads. Let them assemble their fragile narrative on the shifting sands of public sentiment. I wasn't concerned with perception. I was concerned with the cold, hard architecture of the law. While they were giving interviews, I told Mara Duval to launch the counteroffensive. We held no press conference. We sent 3 encrypted digital files to a very specific list of people. The packages went to the private accounts of our board members, the senior editors of 3 major financial publications, and the procurement chiefs of our 3 biggest municipal contracts. The first file was a textbook case for fiduciary breach, filled not with emotion but with timelines and signatures. It proved Delaney and Nolan had been in a relationship for more than a year. This timeline was set against a ledger showing that while they were sharing hotel rooms, they were also co-approving budgets and vetting vendors in official meetings, without ever disclosing their conflict of interest. They had shattered the very foundation of corporate governance. The second file was the financial death blow, completely destroying the romance of their island getaway. This contained the full money trail mapped by Elias Trent, tracing vendor kickbacks into the Pacific Ridge advisory accounts. From that point, the file showed precisely how the money was spent. It documented the 6-figure wire transfer for their Maui beachfront condo security deposit. It detailed dozens of exorbitant consulting payments that had no corresponding work or tangible benefit to our company. It demonstrated that their new life was funded by embezzlement and illegal payments. The third and final package was the technical knockout. Because of Tessa's server copies, we didn't just have documents, we had their immutable digital fingerprints. The third file held the metadata logs, an undeniable timeline showing Delaney's frantic system access to alter affidavits, reports, and vendor contracts. She had falsified the signature dates to create a fraudulent history after the board had already put her on leave. This was no mere policy breach. It was a gateway to federal charges for document forgery and evidence tampering. The damage from these files wasn't measured in media clicks, but in a swift and total financial freeze. Within 24 hours of Mara sending that data, the battlefield tilted violently. 2 massive school district clients negotiating 8-figure contracts instantly halted all projects bearing Delaney's signature, citing concerns over our integrity. That afternoon, a key insurance syndicate froze a huge escrow payment. They suspended a hospital rebuild demanding their own audit of our procedures. The capital flow ceased. The contracts hung in limbo. The board, now dreading regulatory blowback, created a complete firewall between themselves and Delaney's narrative. As the sun went down, the state of play was clear. Nolan and Delaney thought they were fighting an emotional, jilted wife who would eventually exhaust herself. They believed charm and a manipulated public story would win. But as legal notices flooded their inboxes and contacts went silent, the cold reality hit them. I wasn't fighting with emotion. I wasn't playing for public approval. I was methodically dismantling their world with the terrifying power of provable fact. They learned too late that no interview could shield them from a time-stamped log. The deepest horror of betrayal isn't found in the big gestures. It's not the forged signatures or the stolen money in a Hawaiian account. The real poison is in the intimate details. As Elias and Mara dug deeper into the drive, they found a hidden personal directory on Delaney's local machine. In that folder, I discovered the true depth of the deception. My husband wasn't just a beneficiary of my COO's crimes, he was her embedded intelligence source. For 18 months, he had been sneaking into my locked home office while I slept. He photographed my private strategic journals. He took high-resolution pictures of my whiteboard, where I mapped out morale forecasts and executive strategy. Worst of all, he found the encrypted voice recorder in my desk's bottom drawer. For 5 years, on my therapist's advice, I recorded audio journals post-session. They were unfiltered confessions of my deepest insecurities, my fight with imposter syndrome, and my fear of being seen as an unlovable, difficult woman in a male-dominated field. Nolan downloaded every single hour. He sent gigabytes of my rawest thoughts to the woman planning my ruin. Their affair wasn't just in hotel beds. It was a workshop on how to shatter my psyche. Their encrypted chats showed them analyzing my triggers like scientists. They studied me like a system, mapping which inputs would cause a total crash. They knew my trauma response was silent retreat and self-blame. They knew I feared public, messy conflict. They calculated that a sudden, humiliating strike would make me fold inward, question everything, and paralyze myself. But the files revealed a failsafe. If the Maui text didn't break me, Delaney had a second bomb ready. Tessa's drive held a polished whistleblower packet filled with fabricated compliance breaches. It was crafted to be sent anonymously to every school board and investor on our client list, accusing me of Delaney's own crimes. It specifically claimed I'd rigged the Charleston Hospital rebuild bidding process for a flooring contractor. It was a perfectly designed character assassination. Delaney knew Palisade was my entire life. Her plan was to frame me so thoroughly I'd be forced to resign as CEO to save the company from scandal. Had I panicked that night, thrown something, or sent a furious email to the board, I would have walked straight into her trap. I would have lost my husband, my reputation, my contracts, and the company I spent 13 hard years building. For the first time since that photo arrived, the titanium vault inside my chest began to crack. I left Mara's office just after 6 in the evening. The Atlanta air was thick with the humidity of an approaching storm. In the subterranean garage, my footsteps echoed off the damp concrete. I got into my sedan and shut the heavy door, sealing myself in silence. I didn't turn on the car. I just sat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white and my wrists hurt. The sheer violation of it all hit me in a crushing wave. The deepest wound wasn't the infidelity. People cheat. Marriages fail in mundane ways every day. The suffocating pain came from the knowledge that Nolan knew me better than anyone. And he had used that intimate knowledge as a surgical tool to hollow me out. He knew my weakest points. He knew where every old scar was buried, and he had gleefully guided Delaney's blade into the most vulnerable parts of me. I rested my forehead on the cold steering wheel. In the quiet of the garage, I finally let myself feel the grief of being unseen by the man I'd trusted with my life. But as the seconds passed, the grief began to change. The agonizing sorrow hardened into something else, something forged in fire. For days, a voice had whispered the classic questions of the betrayed. What did I lack? Why wasn't I enough? Did I work too much? Was I too cold? Too focused on business to be a desirable partner? Sitting there, staring at the concrete wall, those questions simply vanished. They were absurd. The right question wasn't about my shortcomings. The right question was far sharper. Why did I ever let two greedy, mediocre people define my worth? I lifted my head and met my own gaze in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red with exhaustion, but they were bone dry. The time for tears had never come. I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself in those underground shadows. I wasn't going to fight for my marriage. I didn't want to save a union founded on betrayal. I had no interest in reclaiming a friendship from the woman who poisoned my corporate well. I didn't want their apologies. Remorse requires a conscience, a component absent in those who equate human value with profit margins. What I wanted was total, scorched earth extraction. The only things I would take back were the undisputed truth and an empire left standing over their professional graves. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, its headlights cutting a blinding path through the garage's darkness. I shifted into drive. The way forward was brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. I understood this was no longer a story about petty revenge. It was about violently reclaiming the power to ever write my history again. By Thursday morning, the pressure of my silence began to crush them. When you strip manipulators of their narrative control, they make sloppy mistakes. The first crack appeared at 9:15 a.m., a secure email from Delaney's new counsel, Tamara Duval. It was a formal proposal for a private settlement, a spectacular display of desperation disguised as compromise. Delaney offered to tender her resignation immediately, surrender her unvested equity in Palisade Renewal Group, and walk away without severance. In exchange, she demanded a sweeping non-disclosure agreement. She wanted me to bury the Pacific Ridge dossier and drop any civil litigation against Nolan. Mara read the terms to me over a secure line, her voice dripping with disdain. I didn't need to consider it. I told Mara to reject it immediately, with no counter. You don't offer an enemy a quiet exit when you are winning. Delaney knew that once the forged ledgers hit the public record, her career in corporate America would be incinerated. She was terrified of the truth, and I was done trading in secrets. Just 4 hours later, the second fracture appeared. My personal phone buzzed. It was Nolan. The arrogant, triumphant tone from his Hawaiian message had completely vanished. He was no longer the victorious husband, but a drowning man, grasping for a life raft he had already punctured. His messages were rapid, pathetic bursts. He begged to meet, pleading for 5 minutes to speak like a husband and wife who used to love each other. The audacity was almost clinical. Then came the pivot. He began shifting the entire blame to his new bride, claiming Delaney had manipulated him, that he was merely a pawn caught in her aggressive web of ambition. He wanted me to believe the man who secretly recorded my therapy sessions was the victim. I felt no sympathy, only a profound, freezing disgust. I didn't reply. I took captures of every message and forwarded the chain to Mara. He was contacting me while we prepared for litigation. Nolan had handed us a beautiful, unforced error. Mara immediately categorized it as witness tampering and an indirect admission of guilt. His attempt at nostalgia only added another brick to the wall of his own legal tomb. While their alliance imploded, Elias Trent delivered the final blow from his forensic lab. He presented his completed financial autopsy on a secure video call. The initial numbers were just the tip. Over the last 48 hours, he'd ripped through their encrypted banking network. The final tally was staggering. Elias had proven over $2,400,000 in vendor rebates and fees had been drained from our operational budget. The money flowed from 3 construction suppliers through Pacific Ridge Advisory and then washed out to fund their entire operation. The Maui condo deposit, the wedding, their public relations retainers, and the expensive counsel now fighting me. They had used my own company's revenue to finance their plot to separate me from my life's work. The mechanical precision of the theft was breathtaking. That afternoon, Tessa Van entered a sterile conference room in Mara's office for her sworn deposition, a court reporter documenting every syllable. My former assistant delivered the most damning testimony of the week. Tessa sat perfectly still, recounting a closed-door conversation she overheard between Nolan and Delaney just 3 days before their flight to Hawaii. She testified that she heard Delaney outline the timing of the betrayal. Delaney had said the island wedding had to happen before the emergency board meeting. Tessa quoted her verbatim, stating the objective was to ensure Scarlett walks into the room bleeding out. That single phrase destroyed any possible defense of a crime of passion. Tessa's sworn statement proved absolute, premeditated malice. It confirmed the affair was a calculated, weaponized tactic designed to manipulate corporate governance. Faced with the financial ledgers and Tessa's deposition, the chairman pulled the emergency brake. He bypassed protocol, invoking a rare governance clause. He and the 2 largest investors summoned all parties to a special closed-door session, combined with an emergency arbitration hearing. It was set for 9 o'clock the next morning. There would be no prolonged public court battle. All evidence of governance violations, ethical breaches, and fraud would be judged in one day. The evening before, I stood alone in my vast, silent living room. The oppressive Atlanta heat had finally broken, leaving a cool, sharp night air. I looked around the house bought with my money, protected by my foresight. The silence was no longer a symptom of isolation. It was the sound of total control. I was on the threshold of the climax. I knew what waited for me in the morning. The fear was gone. I wasn't just preparing to confront a cheating husband and a treacherous partner. I was preparing to face the entire architecture of lies they built to erase my legacy. They had spent months digging a grave with my name on it. Tomorrow, I would force them to lie in it. The emergency arbitration convened at 9 a.m. inside a massive, climate-controlled glass boardroom in downtown Atlanta. The space was sterile and cold, a perfect arena for a corporate execution. I sat at the far end of the table, flanked by Mara Duval and Elias Trent. When the heavy glass doors opened, Delaney walked in first. She wore a sharp navy designer suit, trying to project the untouchable aura of a CEO handling a minor misunderstanding. Her chin was high, but the stiff way she pulled out her chair betrayed her panic. Nolan trailed behind her. The effortless magnetic charm that had navigated his entire life was gone. He looked physically diminished, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding my gaze. He looked like a man who finally realized he stood on the wrong side of a very high cliff. The chairman offered no pleasantries, just a curt nod toward my counsel. Mara rose. She didn't launch into a speech on broken vows. She bypassed the personal entirely. Her opening was the cold, hard language of corporate law. She detailed a perfect case of fiduciary breach, concealed suppliers, and conspiracy to alter governance. Then, she gave the floor to Elias Trent. He flooded the boardroom's back wall with brutal, undeniable financial flowcharts. He tracked the stolen capital. He showed the board how 6 figures were siphoned from our supply chain into Pacific Ridge Advisory. He then reversed it, showing that same money funding their Maui condo, first-class flights, and the PR firms now trashing my name. He proved, without question, they financed their coup with our stolen funds. Delaney's face went crimson as she tried to object, but Mara silenced her by projecting the metadata timeline, which aligned perfectly with Tessa's deposition. Mara walked the board through the forgery. The screen showed digital timestamps on ethics forms created 3 hours after that wedding photo hit my phone. Delaney hadn't filed them months ago as she'd claimed. She had built them in a panic from a hotel in Hawaii, a frantic attempt to cover her tracks. Then, the kill shot. Mara clicked her remote, and the screen filled with a title slide from Tessa's mirrored hard drive. The words phase shift dominated the room. Mara walked the stunned board through their assassination plot. She read their own words, detailing the plan. Use the wedding for shock, create a media narrative of my instability, force a vote, and seize the CEO chair in 48 hours. This was no love affair. It was a hostile takeover built on my psychological destruction. Nolan broke. The pressure shattered him. He shot up from his chair, voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at his new bride. He swore he knew nothing of the finances, that he was just a creative, that Delaney had manipulated him. He tried to throw the woman he just married under the bus to save himself. Mara didn't raise her voice. She just clicked to the final slide, a screenshot of a text from Nolan's phone to Delaney's. It read, "Do not worry about the blast radius. She is too proud to scream in public, so she will just break beautifully, and we will walk right in." The silence was absolute. The senior men on the board looked at Nolan with raw, undisguised disgust. He collapsed back into his chair, covering his face, finally understanding no amount of charm could save him from his own words. The chairman didn't need a recess. The vote was immediate and unanimous. Delaney Cross was terminated for cause. The board stripped her of all unvested stock, revoked her authority, and banned her from the property. The board then authorized me to use the firm's full legal power to pursue civil suits against them for collusion, fraud, and data theft. Before we adjourned, I had my own announcement. I told the board I'd spent the morning on the phone with our 3 largest suspended clients. After explaining our new aggressive audit protocols, all 3 had agreed to reactivate their multi-million-dollar contracts. The scandal they designed to destroy my company became the final proof of its resilience. The fortress stood, unmoved. By noon, it was done. Nolan left that building with absolutely nothing. He was locked out of his home. His contracts were gone. His reputation in the industry turned to toxic dust. Delaney lost the company she tried to steal, her title, her future, and now faced years of bankrupting litigation. I stayed at the mahogany table long after everyone had left. The glass doors clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silent boardroom. Afternoon sun streamed through the windows. I stared at the huge black digital monitor. In its dark surface, I saw my own reflection. I didn't look broken or defeated. I looked exactly as I'd always been, a woman who survives and rebuilds. A profound sense of release washed over me. I saw the brutal poetry in it. They sent that text from Maui to make me feel discarded and small. But what they actually delivered, wrapped in champagne and flowers, was the precise timestamp needed to lock them out of my life for good. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below. If this story resonated, subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, like this video, and press the support button so this narrative can reach a wider audience.